much, Greg. Appreciate you. Well, I am so glad that you are here today for two reasons. Number one, if the room was empty, this would be really awkward. So I'm really glad that you are here. But the second reason that I'm glad you're here is the fact that you are here tells me that you want to create a great culture and you want to work at a great culture. Would you agree with that? Absolutely. In fact, I would bet no one in here would say, no, I really love working in a terrible culture. It's great, right? Nobody ever has said that they want to work in a terrible culture. We want to work in a great culture. We want to be part of creating a great culture. I have a friend and a client. I'm going to call her Gabriella. And Gabriella and I worked together for several years. She worked for a big company with about 15,000 people in it at the time. Our company was a vendor of hers that did leadership development programming. And Gabriella and I worked together real closely. In fact, I joked with her, I nicknamed her Top 5 because I said she's one of the top 5 people I've ever met in my life. Just a fascinating woman. Well, one day she calls me up and she says, Garland, I need to tell you something. I'm leaving the company. And I said, why are you leaving the company? And she said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go work somewhere else. She said, huge boost in title, huge boost in influence, huge boost in pay. She said, Garland, this is the type of job that will change the trajectory of my family for decades, maybe even generations. And so we celebrated together. I called her on her first day right before she was getting ready to go to work and prayed with her and told her how excited I was for her. I called her about a month later and I said, how is everything? And she said, oh, you know how this first job, first month is, you're just getting your bearings and trying to figure everything out. And I said, I'll follow up with you at the 6-month mark and just want to see how things are going. And so at the 6-month mark, I called her and I said, Gabriella, this was a change of trajectory. This was going to change the course of your family for decades to come. How is it going? And she said, I think I made a mistake coming here. I said, what's going on? And she said, the culture. And I said, well, what do you mean by it? And she said, I can't describe it. I don't even know how to tell you about it. I just know that at the end of every day, I feel like I'm less of a human being. I said, well, what are you going to do with that? And she said, I'm going to change the culture. Now, she wasn't in a CEO role or a leadership team role, but she was convinced. She was like, I'm going to change the culture. I'm going to change it. A couple weeks later, Gabriella got a new boss and things got even worse. I kept in contact with her at the 2-year mark. She called me up and she said, Garland, I've got some really good news for you. I said, what's the news? And she said, I'm going back to the company that I was working with. And I said, but this was your opportunity. This was going to change the trajectory of your family for decades, if not generations to come. And she said, I would rather work in a healthy culture than make more money. She said, because at the end of the day, this job is, the bad job, she said, it is changing the trajectory of my family, but it's all in the wrong direction. She came back to the company. She and I still work together. It's an amazing company, great culture that they've got there. This idea, though, of culture, we all know that we would rather work in a healthy culture. In fact, 61% of people in a 2024 workplace survey, 61% of people said that they would leave their current job and take less money to go work in a better culture. Now, I know what you're saying. Why should a person have to choose between more money and a healthy culture? Well, in an ideal world, they won't, right? All of us would agree. We would much rather make more money and work in a healthy culture, right? Anybody disagree with that? No. Okay, everybody agrees with that. We'd all rather have that. But 61% of surveyed people said that if push came to shove, they would pick a healthy culture over higher pay. So we can all agree that culture is one of the most important things that your company can develop. But here's the problem. Culture is this fuzzy, ambiguous, maybe it's not a unicorn, but it's like a narwhal, right? How do you create a healthy culture? What does a healthy culture even look like? Does that mean that everybody plays ping pong when they want to play ping pong? Or does a healthy culture mean that you get 10 weeks of vacation? Does a healthy culture mean that everybody gets along well? Or does a healthy culture mean that there's actual real conflict that's going on? This whole idea of culture is something that all of us can agree that we want, but very few of us know what it is and how to create it. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to walk you through 4 ways that you can guarantee a healthy culture. In fact, I'm going to give you a bonus 5th way that you can guarantee a healthy culture. But before we do that, we've got to understand what culture is and then some different types of culture that you've got. Now, throughout this, I'm not going to be talking for 90 straight minutes. Dear God, nobody wants to hear that, especially my children. Nobody wants to hear that, okay? Instead, we're going to have multiple times throughout this where you're talking with each other. So here's what I need you to do. I need you to get into groups of 2 to 3 and get ready for some conversations. If you don't know the people who you're talking with, please introduce yourself to them, okay? If you do know the people who you're talking with, here's the question I want you to answer. I'm going to give you 3 minutes for this conversation. Here's the question I want you to answer. What was your favorite childhood activity? All right, so introduce yourself. What was your favorite childhood activity so we can have some good conversations? Take 3 minutes for that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So in order to understand how you develop a healthy culture, first we're going to look at what a culture is. Then we're going to look at 3 types of culture, and then we'll actually look at these 4 ways that you can guarantee. So first stop, what is a culture? If you're going to create a healthy culture, you have to know what a healthy culture is. So the first stop is understanding what a culture is. A culture is the lived out values and beliefs of an organization. The lived out values and beliefs of an organization. James is a friend of mine. He recently became the CEO of a lawn service company. The lawn service company, their first core value, the first value that they talk about is people over profit. People over profit. They have it on their website. It's plastered on their trucks. Everywhere you go, when you see their company, it says people over profit. It's one of the reasons James took the job, is because he wanted to work for a company that valued people over profit. First 6 months in the job, as James sat in on meetings, he made an interesting observation. Every meeting, from the frontline meetings all the way to the senior leadership meetings, every meeting started, ended, and completely consisted of talking about money. If they missed a lawn care service, they didn't lament the fact that a person missed their service. They got upset over the fact that they would not hit their budget. When a customer complained about something, they got angry over the fact that they needed to go back and fix something because they were going to lose money doing that. After 6 months, James realized that the lived out value was profit over people. A culture is the lived out values. It's not the stated values, but it's actually how we conduct ourselves in business. And so James knew that he needed to change something so that people would truly be more important than profit. A culture is the lived out values and beliefs. But that begs the question, of course, what are values? Okay, so these will be some of the only definitions we go over. There'll be a few definitions through here. Values are the ideals that shape the company's decisions, behaviors, and norms. Values are these ideals that shape decisions, behaviors, and norms. So if you think about James, as he's sitting in on these meetings, every decision they're making is not focused on how do we benefit people, it's focused on how do we make more money. Don't get me wrong, we need to make money. You don't make money, you don't stay in business. But the value that they said they believed wasn't what they actually practiced. It didn't affect their decisions. It didn't affect their behaviors. It didn't affect what they got happy about or upset about. It didn't affect the way that they lived things out. And it didn't affect their norms. It didn't affect the way that they did business as usual. So values are these ideals. There was a man in the 1950s named Horst Schulze. Horst Schulze was from Germany. Probably could tell that by his name. Horst Schulze was from Germany, and he had grown up working in the hotel industry. Now, in the 1950s, the hotel industry nationwide, globally, not just Germany, but globally, the hotel industry had a seedy reputation. Hotels were not destinations that you went to. They were not luxury places. Hotels they were the places where you took your life in your hands if you were going to stay there. Lots of shady operations going on. Lots of prostitution and drug rings were operated out of hotels. But Horst Schulze decided that he wanted to change the entire culture of the hotel industry. And so he created one value. He said, I'm going to create a hotel where ladies and gentlemen are serving ladies and gentlemen. He said, I want the person who is making up the room every morning to feel like a lady or a gentleman. I want, when a customer comes in and gets a room at our hotel, I want them to feel like a lady and gentleman who's engaging with a lady and gentleman. And so Horst Schulze set out to create a hotel chain that you may have heard of. It's called the Ritz-Carlton. He completely changed the culture of the hotel industry by identifying one value and living that value up, living it out in everything. We're going to look more at Ritz-Carlton things. So we have this culture. The culture is the lived out values and beliefs of the organization. Lived out values and beliefs. I want you to go back into your groups for a second. If your company or your organization has core values, what are they? And if you don't know what they are, based on the behavior of people, what do you think they are? Does that question make sense? What are the values? Or if you don't know, what do you think the values might be based on the behaviors? Take 3 minutes for that conversation. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, here's a picture of our friend Horst Schulze. If you're going to create a culture, you need to understand that there are only 3 types of culture that any company can have. Okay? You get to choose what type you shape. So the first type of culture that any company could have is a toxic culture. And toxic is one of those words that you see all the time. If you're on LinkedIn at all, you'll probably see somebody post, "I worked for a toxic culture." And if you start messaging them, "Tell me a little bit about what it means to work in a toxic culture," they'll be like, "They only gave me 6 weeks of vacation instead of 8. And you're like, "I'm not really sure that's what a toxic culture is." Or things like, "They made me come into the office at 8. Well, when did business start? At 8. Right? And you're like, okay, this isn't a toxic culture. That's called a job. Right? Those things, a toxic culture. What a toxic culture is a culture that allows or encourages dehumanizing behavior. Racism, sexism, ageism, sizeism. If it ends with ism, there's a good chance that's a toxic culture. But a toxic culture can look like bullying. It can look like putting people down. I was talking to a company out in Texas several years ago about doing some leadership development with them. We have a commitment in our business that my wife and I are co-owners of our business, and we have a commitment that we don't deal with jerks. It's just real simple. If you're a jerk, we don't want to work with you. And so a few years ago, there was a company out in Texas. And we got really excited. They were interested in working with us. We got really excited. They were in kind of the tech startup world. They were doing some really cool things that were benefiting a lot of people. And we decided to go spend a day with them to sit on their leadership team meetings and see if it was a good fit for us to work together. There were 15 people in the room. And the CEO and the COO were in there together, and they were arguing through a problem that they had been arguing over for about 6 months. And there was some heated conversation. I don't mind heated conversation. That doesn't mean you're a jerk. That means you're passionate, right? And so there was some heated conversation. But finally, after about 3 hours of engaging in this debate, the CEO turned to the COO and said, "If you weren't so stupid and lazy, we would have figured this out." That's a toxic culture. Because everybody in the room just sat silent and was like, "We don't know what to do with this, but we're not going to respond to it." We decided not to work with them, right? Because that's a toxic culture. A toxic culture is one that allows or encourages dehumanizing behavior. That's different than an unhealthy culture. An unhealthy culture is one where the values don't drive the behaviors. The values that you say you believe don't actually drive the behaviors that you expect from people. That's what my friend James was dealing with. An unhealthy culture where they said people over profit, but the values didn't drive the behaviors. You may have worked in an unhealthy culture. I would almost bet that you've done business with an unhealthy culture. There is a certain global restaurant with golden arches. And if you go to their website, you will see that the number one core value that they say they believe is serving. Does anybody here work for McDonald's? Okay, good. Whew, that would be so awkward. Right. What does it say under that? We put our customers and people first. Now, I don't know if you've done much business with McDonald's, but it's pretty rare if you go to McDonald's that you feel like you're put first. In fact, I decided to put this to the test a few years ago. I saw this on their website. I was like, oh, I got to see. So I live in Farragut. I went to the local Farragut McDonald's and I pulled up to the drive-thru. Rolled down my window, and over the microphone, the person says, "What do you want?" And I said, "I will take a double quarter pounder with cheese, fries, and a cherry Coke, and I'll do an ice cream cone as well. And they said, our ice cream machine is broken. Do you know that there's a website called McBroken where you can see if the actual machine is working? That's how prevalent a broken machine is. If they really valued serving people, don't you think that was something they could figure out? And I said, okay, well, I'll just take the double quarter pounder, the fries, and the cherry Coke. I pull up to the window, you know, like you go to the first window and the person's standing sideways. So I go up to the first window, the person's standing sideways. He does not look away from his computer screen. He just puts his hand out like this. Goes, that'll be $11.42. Takes my card, swipes the card, gives me back the card, goes next window. I drive up to the next window, pull up, I'm waiting there. And this may be slightly exaggerated, but this is how I remember it. I remember them taking the fries out of the fryer, putting salt, grabbing them and like wringing them out kind of thing. And then if I remember correctly, I may be exaggerating here, the guy took the bag and he dropped back 7 steps and tossed it through the window. And I was like, I got it! I did not feel served. Now granted, that's one data point, but I think we can probably agree that a McDonald's that delivers great service is the exception, not the rule. So an unhealthy company or an unhealthy culture is one where the values don't drive the actual behaviors. That is different than, let me say this. Forgot to say this. Unintentional cultures always develop into unhealthy cultures. What do we mean by an unintentional culture? It is a culture where you as leaders don't intentionally shape the behaviors you expect from people. The behaviors that determine how you hire people. The behaviors that determine why you would fire somebody. The behaviors that determine why you would promote someone. The behaviors that get rewarded. Unintentional cultures, that's a culture where leaders don't intentionally shape the behaviors that they expect. Those cultures always, without exception, they always become unhealthy. And sometimes they become toxic as well. The hard work, some of the hard work of leadership is hard work, period. But some of the hardest work of leadership is creating an intentional culture. And when you do that, you get a healthy culture. And a healthy culture is one where the values drive the behaviors. Where what you say you believe actually shapes what you do. We're going to spend the rest of our time together looking at 5 behaviors that leaders shape. That when you shape these behaviors, you can guarantee a healthy culture. 5 behaviors that will help you guarantee a healthy culture. Now, as we're looking at these 5 behaviors, what we're going to look at are some companies that have done this really, really well, and some companies that haven't done this really, really well. I'm going to tell you a lot of stories, but there's going to be one company that we pay special attention to, and I can guarantee that no one in here is a competitor of theirs. So here's a little background to this company. I am an avid collector of weird baseball hats. Avid collector. That's the last 3 years. So I love collecting weird baseball hats. Most of these hats are weird minor league teams. For example, if you can see this one, this is an upside down cow. That's the Wichita Cow Tippers. Right? I love collecting really weird baseball hats. But the first weird hat that I ever collected was in 2019 from a little team that I had never heard of at the time. And in 2019, barely anybody had heard of them, the Savannah Bananas. Now, the Savannah Bananas have become this amazingly hot team. Everybody knows about them. And part of that is marketing. But a huge part of that is culture. Just a little bit about the Savannah Bananas, in case you don't know. So the wait list to get to a Savannah Bananas team is over 1 million people. 1 million people who are on the wait list. In order to get tickets to the Savannah Bananas, you have to enter a lottery about 2 or 3 months before a game is going to take place, and you're competing against hundreds of thousands of other people for those tickets. The wait list to work for the Savannah Bananas is over 2,000 people. Can you imagine being in HR and being like, hey, we got 2,000 people to pick from for this position. I hope we can find a good candidate, right? Man, what a problem to have. The Savannah Bananas, year over year, they sold out every game since their first season opener. And, get this, they have increased their revenue about 500% year over year for the last 5 years. How have they done it? Marketing's a part of it, but culture is a huge part of it as well. So let's look at these 5 behaviors that they have done that are deeply shaping what they do. The first behavior that we're going to look at is habits. Leaders shape habits. Now, I told you there's going to be some definitions in here. So, what's a habit? Ooh, forgot that. Let me go back. There we go. A habit is an action that occurs when a specific trigger takes place. It's an action that occurs when a specific trigger takes place. Leaders who want to create a great culture shape habits. I discovered this from the Savannah Bananas because they were the first baseball hat I ever ordered in 2019. I had never ordered any other hats. I just saw their logo and I was like, that's a cool logo. I like a hat that has that on there. A few days later, I got a box in the mail. It was a bright yellow box, and all over it were stamps that had Savannah Bananas all over it. I opened the box and it was filled with that blue crinkle cut confetti that makes everything both a celebration and a mess, right? And I opened it up, and buried deep inside was the hat that I had ordered. And so I pulled out this hat, spilled the confetti everywhere all over my kitchen, but I didn't care because I was getting this hat. But then I looked, and at the bottom of the box, there was a huge Savannah Bananas sticker that I didn't pay for. There was a koozie, so I could wrap that around my beverages. I do like strong beverages that are not only coffee. And so I got excited because I could get a koozie, but then the piece de resistance, there was a handwritten note. Dear Garland, thanks for being a Bananas fan. We hope this hat brings you joy. Go Bananas, Deidre. What? I started thinking to myself, if this is the way I get treated with every minor league baseball team that I buy a hat from, I'm buying a hat once a month. I feel like a king. And so a month later, I ordered another hat. The Rocket City Trash Pandas out of Alabama. And do you know what I got? A cardboard box with a hat and a receipt. I have tested this. As you saw, I've got about 90 hats now. I have never received anything like that package from the Savannah Bananas. A habit is an action that takes place when or an action that a person does when a specific trigger takes place. Trigger, someone buys something. Action, write a note. Now, you know a lot about habits as well. There was a young man in the 1980s. I say young man, he was in his late 30s. That's young to me now. There was a young man, he was in his late 30s, I believe, at the time, and he went to stay at a Ritz-Carlton hotel. The young man had luggage in the back of his car, and somebody came out to take care of it. And that young man, he was a business owner. He looked at the person who helped him with the luggage, and he said, "Thank you." And the young man said, "My pleasure." That young business owner thought, "Ooh, I like that. My pleasure, that sounds good. That sounds really, really good." And so he went to the front desk of the Ritz-Carlton to get checked in. And when he was finished, he said, "Thank you." And the person said, "My pleasure." The person carried up his bags to his room and he said, "Thank you." And the person said, "My pleasure." And that young man said to himself, "I like that. I like the sound of that, my pleasure. I'm going to go back and institute that in my business." That business, as you probably can guess, is Chick-fil-A. I spent 15 years working with Chick-fil-A and got to see the evolution of that take place, where people began to say, "My pleasure." That is a habit that they have learned to develop. When someone says thank you, the response is always, "My pleasure." Right. Habits shape culture. So I want you to go back into your groups, and we're going to do this frequently over the next little bit of time. You have habits in your organization. Those habits might conflict with the values. For example, if you go to McDonald's and you say thank you, you're going to be greeted with, "Uh-huh." That is not a serving value. So some of your habits may conflict with the values you say you believe. Others may reflect the values. So I want you to pick one value and identify one habit. Does it conflict or reflect the values? I'll give you 3 minutes for it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The first behavior that you shape is habits. The second is attitudes. If you want to create a great culture, you've got to shape the attitudes of people. So what is an attitude? An attitude is an outward expression of inner feelings. An outward expression of inner feelings about work or customers or coworkers. You can't change a person's feelings, but you can hire based upon kind of how they present themselves, what you can guess their inner feelings are. What you can do is shape the outward expression of that. The Savannah Bananas, their number one core value is fans first. What they say is, we want our fans to have an amazing experience. So imagine most baseball games. How many of you have ever been to any game besides a Savannah Banana baseball game? Okay, several of you. When I think of baseball games, I think that I am typically bored out of my mind. Now, some people love baseball, right? These are the same people who like watching grass grow, right? I'm getting pushed back. I just lost a member of the group here. right? I don't love watching baseball, and part of the reason is, for me, the highlight of baseball is anything other than baseball. It's going to get food or a drink or going to the shop. It's anything other than actually watching the baseball game. Because the baseball game, in my opinion, I know I'm wrong, don't hate me here, but the baseball game is a whole lot of people standing around for a long time. So Jesse Owens, the founder of the Savannah Bananas, said, we want to put fans first. That's what a Savannah Bananas game looks like. There's energy, there's excitement, there's enthusiasm. There are people who are on stilts who are there. It's an outward expression of an inner feeling. Now, I got to experience this firsthand. I took, my family went on vacation in Savannah several years ago. If you're going to be in Savannah, of course you wear your Savannah Bananas hat. And so had been wearing my Savannah Bananas hat all week long. And one night we were going to dinner. And as we were walking and getting escorted to our table, I was walking by the draft beers and was looking at all of them to figure out which one I was going to get, right? So I'm looking at all of the beers, and I hear this guy go, hey, nice hat. I turn and I look over, and it's a guy in a bright yellow shirt wearing a Savannah Bananas shirt. And I said, oh, nice shirt. And I look up, and it's Jesse Owens. Jesse Cole. Jesse Owens was an Olympic person. Jesse Cole. Y'all were like, what? He's reincarnated? Jesse Cole. Sorry about that. Jesse Cole is sitting there, and he's the guy who had said, nice hat to me. And I fangirled. I was like, oh my gosh, you're Jesse Cole, you're Jesse Cole. And he's like, yeah, I'm Jesse Cole. I'm like, this is my wife. I'm so excited. I'm like, if we have any other kids, we'll name them after you. Like, I am so excited to meet Jesse Cole. He introduces me to the head of ticketing. I ask the head of ticketing if there's any way we can get in and get some good tickets. He says no. I'm disinterested in him. But I have this big conversation with Jesse Cole. At the end of the meal, our server, we sit down, and literally, like, the whole time, I'm like shaking with excitement. I was like, I've read all your books. I talk about you all the time. How cool is this? At the end of the meal, we are getting ready to leave. Our server says, would you like any dessert? I said, no, we're good. She goes, are you sure you don't want any dessert? I said, yeah, we're absolutely sure. Don't want any dessert. And she said, okay, the guy in yellow paid for your dinner. And I said, I'll take dessert and beer. I didn't really do that. And she said, he said that he hopes that you have an amazing evening. Go Bananas. There was an outward expression. He smiled. He greeted us. He cared about fans first. Chick-fil-A, I know I'm not going to talk about Chick-fil-A all the time, but Chick-fil-A does this really, really well. One of the things that they do is they shape people's attitudes by shaping their facial expressions. They will say, so they hire people, they hire friendly people, that's very important, but they'll say, when you see a customer, we want you to make eye contact. We want you to smile at them. We want you to greet them warmly, and then we want you to carry on the conversation. In other words, if there's a lull in anything, then we want you to carry on the conversation. And they'll train their Neanderthal teenage boys. They'll train teenagers in how to carry on a conversation. Do they have children? Ask about their children. Are they wearing a jersey or a team? Ask them how that team is doing. Are they from a local school or have a jersey from a local school? Ask them about that school. Right? And so they train them in 6 different ways to do this. It's an outward expression of an inner feeling. So I want you to pick one of your values. What are the attitudes that take place in your business? Do they reflect that value, or do they conflict with that value? I'll give you 3 more minutes for that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The next behavior that you help shape is resources. How you use resources, does that reflect what you value? How you use resources. Resources could be time, resources could be money, resources could be energy, resources could be assets that you have, resources could be people who you work with. How do you treat and utilize the resources that you have? That's one way that you shape culture. The way that you spend those resources and use those resources should reflect the values. Early in my career, I worked at a nonprofit. And that nonprofit, their first core value was family, and their second core value was generosity. I didn't make much money. Nobody made much money. But I realized, but we all thought, it's a nonprofit, right? Like, that's how nonprofits go. One day, I was with some coworkers and some others who were serving at a food pantry. And the director of the food pantry said, "Oh, you work for blah, blah, blah. We love you guys." And I said, "Oh, do you love us because like a lot of us volunteer here?" And she goes, "No. The employees who work there are the people who are the nicest and the most frequent people who come and get food from here." And I started digging in a little bit and discovered that this nonprofit that valued family and generosity underpaid people 60% below market value. That the majority, there were 300 employees here, and over 150 of them had to frequently eat and get their groceries from the food pantry because they didn't make enough money to pay for housing and food. That's unhealthy, maybe even a little toxic or a lot toxic. The resources that you use should reflect the values that you say you believe. With the Savannah Bananas, their number one core value is fans first. And one of the things that they've identified is when you go to a game, here's how they say it. They'll say, every pay point is a pain point. Every time you go to a game, if you have to pay for something, there's a little bit of pain that you experience there. So they started asking the question, how do we take away as many pay points as possible? Here's what they decided to do. If you're eating at their stadium, Grayson Stadium in Savannah, if you're eating at their stadium, your ticket price is a little bit more than most minor league baseball games. But you get unlimited food and drink. I know, you're like, I'm going to a game. Good luck. 1 million person wait list, right? You get unlimited food and drinks. Now here's what's interesting as well. At Grayson Stadium, at least, they don't sell any alcohol because they know that one rowdy person in the crowd can ruin an entire crowd's experience. Not only do they not sell alcohol, they don't have any sponsorships. Have you ever been to a baseball game and you're sitting there and they're like, "Folks, we would like to thank our sponsors at Acme Company. They have given us blah, 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 and we thank you." And you're like, I don't care. Nobody cares. They've rejected all sponsorships. So they've lost millions and millions and millions of dollars in potential sponsorships because they don't want to interrupt the fans' experience with advertisements that they don't care about. Your resources say a ton about what you value. So we're going to make this one a little bit shorter. You got 2 minutes on this one. Look at the resources in your company. Do they reflect or conflict with that value that you identified? Take 2 minutes. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so we have habits, attitudes, resources. I told you I'm giving you a bonus fifth one, so we'll look at the fourth one first. Policies. How many of you are in HR in here? Have you? Okay. Y'all are stewards of all those policies. Your policies reflect the values that you really believe. Your policies reflect the values. Let me give you a bad example and a good example. I'm going to go back to the nonprofit that I was working with. First core value, family. Second core value, generosity. When Dorothy, my wife is Dorothy, Judy Garland played Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, so we have 3 kids. The Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, Toto. No. So we had our first kid in 2004 when we were working with this organization. And right before he was ready to be born, I called because I didn't know the paternity leave policy. And so I called up and I just said, hey, can you tell me how many days do I get off for having a child? Or for my wife having a child. And they said, you get 1 day off. And I said, like the day of the birth and then another day? And they were like, no, the day of the birth. Like you get the day of the birth off and then come back. And I said, okay, I'll use my sick leave for that. Because the sick leave policy there was if any of your family members are sick and you're the primary caretaker, you can take a day of leave. And I said, I'll use my sick leave for that because my wife is bedridden and my son is in a crib and needs help. And she said, oh, you can't use your sick leave for that. And I said, but I'm the primary caretaker right now. Like I'm the only caretaker right now. And she said, no, you have to use vacation time for that. And I said, have you ever had a kid? And she said, yeah, I have 2 of them. And I said, well, I've never had a kid, but I'm pretty sure that having a newborn is not a vacation. And she was like, well, that's what you've got to do. The policy didn't reflect the value of family. Now contradict that with the Ritz-Carlton. One of their policies is that any team member at any level can spend up to $2,000 on any customer to make their day better. You're like, I'm going to go to the Ritz-Carlton and I'm going to complain all the time. They can spend up to $2,000 without permission to make a person's day better. I had a friend of mine who stayed at a Ritz-Carlton once. He was in town for a business meeting. He went there, checked in late. It was like 8 o'clock at night. And they said, how you doing? And he said, I'm good, but the airline lost my luggage. I have nothing to wear for this meeting tomorrow. And they said, tell us about the meeting. And it was a really big meeting. He was doing a proposal and needed to look good. They called up a local tailor and had them open the store and make a suit for him. I know, like you're going to Ritz-Carlton now and you're going to be like, I'm going to complain about everything. Your policies reflect what you actually value. So I want you to pick one policy. I want you to pick one of your values. Does it reflect or does it conflict with what you say you believe? I'm only giving you 90 seconds for this one. Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now you're going to go back into your groups in just a second. You're going to go back very quickly. Before I introduce you to the final behavior, I want to give you all time for questions, comments, and snide remarks. Now here's the deal. If you make a snide remark, that's a love language to me, but I reserve the right to give it right back, okay? I love snide remarks though. Okay, questions, comments, and snide remarks. But I also know that asking a question in a group this size can be a little intimidating. So I want you to go back into your groups for just a couple minutes and discuss what questions you might like to ask or what comments you would like to make. And then maybe you'll feel a little bit braver, or you can designate somebody who you're sitting with to ask the question on your behalf. So I'm going to give you about 90 seconds to identify any questions, comments, or snide remarks that you would like answered or to make, and then we'll come back together. Take 90 seconds. Questions or comments you want to ask? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, who has a question, a comment, or a snide remark? Yes.
What has been the most radical success story that you've seen from an unhealthy culture to unhealthy bonus points if it's a nonprofit?
Okay, I'll tell you we work mainly with for-profits. The biggest, oh man, there's two that are so good. I'll do the one that has a longer term culture on that, and we're still working with them. So we started working with a company, global footprint, about 20,000 employees, and let me just kind of do the compare and contrast. The first day of training them, we weren't even talking about culture, we were just talking about leadership on this first day. And the first day, I made a comment and I said, you should care about people like it's your job, because it is. And this guy raised his hand. He had been a 20-year employee there, and he said, you mean we're supposed to care about these people? And I said, well, first, anytime you say these people, that's typically a bad sign, right? But I said, yeah, absolutely. Actually, leadership starts with caring about people, customers, employees, co-workers, shareholders. It starts with caring about people so much that you're willing to do what's good for them. And that was my first taste of that company. We worked with them for, we've been working with them now for about 8 years, but it was about 3 years in that we started seeing that they were talking about people and about how you care for people. And they were talking about employee engagement, not as a tool to make more money, though it is, it's for higher profitability, but they started talking about employee engagement as a way to benefit people and as a way to help people. And they actually changed their core values a couple of years ago, and it's people first is their first core value. So that's one where I would say I'm super proud of that, because they've done a lot of work, and we've done a lot of work with them to see that transformation. Yeah. Question. Other questions?
So we were wondering, being that most people put their best foot forward in the interview in order to get hired, what happens in companies like Chick-fil-A when the employee's behavior doesn't reflect the company's values? How do they go about training, or, I don't want to use the word necessarily enforcing the values, but how do they go about encouraging the employees to reflect those values?
Yeah, love that question. So first, you have to acknowledge that hiring is where your core values are put to the test. Like your core values are put to the test a lot, but that's really the first place, is are we looking for these values that we say that we believe? So the first thing that companies like Chick-fil-A and other companies do really well is they hire people based on those core values, and they'll actually create circumstances. Let me give you an example. This is from the nonprofit. We worked with a nonprofit that worked with college students, and they would give college students a scholarship. There was a lot more to it, but they would give certain college students a scholarship. But one of their core values was integrity. And so in order to test in the hiring phase, they would actually create games where these college students would compete against each other, but where cheating was easy. And they looked for students who, if a student cheated in the game, that student's not getting a scholarship. If we can observe bad behavior in the hiring process, we know we can't possibly trust them to do that. So what really, really good cultures do is they hire based on those core values, and then they train in addition to that. So they hire for people first, but then they train the exact behaviors for people first that they want to do. It is very hard. I'm giving you a long answer, but it is very hard to train someone who does not value the things that the company values. And so the hard answer is that really healthy cultures acknowledge that. They try to fix behavior, but they don't wait a long time. It is better. There's a saying that I love. It says, the culture of your company is the worst behavior the highest leader tolerates. That's really the culture of your company. And so you see this a lot. You really see this a lot. If you have a high-performing person who violates the values, but they're the best salesperson, they're the best at whatever, that's where you really begin to see what you really value, is when you have this high-performing person and they're violating the culture. Do you value the culture, or do you value that person's performance more?
Can you say that one more time?
Sure. The culture is the worst behavior the highest person allows. Oh, that's okay. Before I give you the final behavior, any other questions or clarifications? Yes?
Our group was wondering if any of these carry more weight or if they're sequential.
They're not sequential. I would say, I don't know that they carry more weight. They definitely work in tandem. I would say that the attitudes one is the one where it's good to start with that one. Like if you know that you have this value of, let's say, safety. Say safety is a value. And people's attitudes are basically like, whatever, about safety. Then if you can start there and figure out, okay, how do you have an attitude that protects somebody else, even if you don't care about you, then the habits, the resources, the policies, all of those become a little bit easier. But yeah, so not necessarily in order. The reason I put them in this order is because they form the word HARP, and that becomes a little bit easier to remember. Thanks for that. Okay, let's look at the final one. The final behavior is your processes. Your processes reflect your values. So what is a process? A process is a series of steps that are put together to produce a specific, repeatable outcome. A series of steps that are put together to produce a specific, repeatable outcome. The Savannah Bananas, their number one core value is fans first. If you've ever been to a baseball game, most baseball games end with a fizzle. Unless it's like a great game, like a really tight game or something like that. Most baseball games end like this. The last person strikes out or whatever, and then the announcer comes over the loudspeaker. Thanks, folks, for coming to the game today. We appreciate you. Don't forget to buy from Acme Company the next time you need something. The next game will be with this opposing team, and we'll see you in 2 days. Wah, wah, wah. That's the end of the game. And so the Savannah Bananas, they started realizing, they were like, wait a second, the way that we end games is just as important as all of the 9 innings that we're playing the game. In fact, it's more important because the fans want to leave on a high note. And so they created a process. Here's what their process looks like. When the game ends, first, all of the players stay on the field and allow fans to come get their autographs. You're not willing to stay on the field, you're not going to be a banana. They let people, they get people to stay on the field. But of course, that could last for days, right? And so they realized they needed something that would help get people moving out. So here's what they started doing. At the end of the game, they'll be on the field, and as they're signing autographs, they're also moving everyone toward the exit, very slowly, moving people toward the exit. When they get to the exit of the stadium, the players disperse around and they get together with the fans, and everybody locks arms or around each other's shoulders, and they start singing "Stand By Me." And everybody, fans included, sings "Stand By Me" as they begin to walk them out of the doors. If it's raining, you get escorted by a banana player to your car with an umbrella. And they get everyone out and to their cars safely before they ever leave the stadium. Your processes reflect what you really value. So take a look at your processes next time and begin to look at your values and go, okay, how does this process reflect this value? Or does it conflict with this value? Everybody in the world wants to work for a healthy culture. There's nobody I would bet who says that they would love to work with an unhealthy culture. And you as leaders are the people who create a healthy culture through the habits, through the attitudes, through the resources, through the policies, through the processes. But your creation of that does so much more. A healthy culture isn't simply about making a better workplace. Yeah?
So I've got a question on that. The whole Ritz-Carlton
Yeah.
kind of thing, like I've read the book and they have the +1 where people can do like the special things. How do you, I feel like it's difficult. You have to train your mind to think that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like my brain is so limited and conditioned. It's sometimes hard, even though you want to serve.
Yeah.
You want to do special things for people. Well, what are those things? Like, I think that takes like a special brain. How do you train yourself to start to think that way? To have a baseball player walk a fan to the car with an umbrella? Like,
Yeah.
that's a different thought process, right?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things that you could do that would make it simpler. One is don't just depend on your brain. Ask other people, including customers, that you can begin asking customers, hey, what's a little, this is something we value. What's a little thing that we could do that would help express that for you? So start asking customers. A second thing that you can do, this is going to be totally cheating, but use AI to help you generate a list of things and just say, hey, here's a value that we believe. Here's our customers that we serve and the employees who work here. Give me a list of 50 things we might be able to do to live out this value. Don't pick all of them, but pick one that's doing it. And then the third thing that I would say is hopefully that list, habits, attitudes, resources, policies, processes, pick one of those. Pick one value, pick one of those and go, okay, what's a habit that we could do that reflects this? Again, you don't have to do everything, but that the framework there should give you some insight into beginning to brainstorm on those. Thanks for that question. Creating a great culture isn't just about creating a good workplace. It is about creating a better world. Because when people go home at the end of the day and they talk about the job, whether they call it the culture or not, they're going to talk about the culture. It's about creating a better place. I want to just end with one quick story from Ritz-Carlton that really demonstrates this. There was a man and his wife who were staying at a Ritz-Carlton in Dubai. And the wife was in a wheelchair. And as they were having dinner, the waiter overheard her saying how sad she was that she would not get to go to the beach. The waiter looked outside and wasn't sure what was going on, and so he said, I overheard you. Could you tell me a little bit about what happened, why you can't go to the beach? And she said, well, I'm in this wheelchair and it's a sand pathway the whole way. I can't possibly get to the beach in a wheelchair. And he said, oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. That waiter left, went and talked to maintenance. The next day, there was a 200-foot walkway to the beach that had been built for her. When you create a great culture, you don't just create a great workplace, you create a great world. You make people's lives better. Is it easy? No. Is it intentional? Absolutely. So thank you all so much for taking time today to be here. Greg, you got some more stuff?